Copper Valley, Arizona sits nestled between sun-scorched mountains, a place where neighbors recognize each other at the grocery store and wave across dusty streets. The kind of town where church bells ring on Sunday mornings, and people actually show up. For 15 years, those bells called the faithful to New Hope Community Church, where Pastor Thomas Wright delivered messages of hope and redemption, while his wife Rebecca's piano music floated through the sanctuary. They were the couple everyone admired. Thomas, with his commanding presence and thoughtful sermons that connected ancient scripture to modern problems. Rebecca, with her gentle smile and fingers that could make the church's old piano sound like it belonged in a concert hall. Together, they weren't just spiritual leaders. They were the heart of Copper Valley's tight-knit community. They gave us direction, said longtime church member Donna Hartman. When my husband lost his job, Pastor Thomas found him work. When my daughter needed college money, Rebecca helped her apply for the church scholarship. That scholarship was just one of many charitable projects the Wrights spearheaded. The Building Fund for a Youth Center, a food pantry that never seemed to empty, a community that never questioned where the money went, because why would they? But on a sweltering Sunday in July, everything changed. Within hours of the final hymn fading into silence, Rebecca Wright would be dead on the floor of their modest home. And the man who had preached about truth and righteousness for over a decade would make a panicked 911 call, claiming his wife had fallen. What happened in those hours between the church service and that call? How did a respected pastor become a suspected killer? And how had no one noticed the cracks in this seemingly perfect facade until it was too late? Before we continue this shocking story, take a moment to subscribe to True Crime Stories for weekly investigations into cases that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Thomas and Rebecca Wright's story began far from the Arizona desert, in the rain-soaked campus of Westlake Theological Seminary in Ohio. Fall semester 2001. Thomas was studying pastoral ministry, already showing the charisma that would later fill church pews. Rebecca Davis was there pursuing sacred music, having played piano since she was 5 years old. She wasn't just technically gifted, recalled Dr. James Hoffman, Rebecca's former music professor. She understood how music could touch people's souls. That's something you can't teach. They met during a chapel service planning committee. Thomas needed music for his first student sermon. Rebecca volunteered. According to classmates, they were drawn to each other immediately. Thomas captivated by her quiet confidence at the keys, Rebecca impressed by his passion for ministry. You could see it happening, said Philip Monroe, Thomas's roommate at the time. He'd wait after her practice sessions, carrying her music books. She'd sit front row at his practice sermons, taking notes. They married the summer before their final year, a small ceremony with fellow students singing hymns Rebecca had arranged. Their wedding photos show a handsome couple, Thomas tall and confident, Rebecca with warm eyes and a gentle smile that friends said never changed, even years later. After graduation, they didn't immediately find a church home. 3 years of assistant positions followed, Thomas working under established pastors, Rebecca teaching piano and filling in as needed on church keyboards. They moved from Ohio to Michigan, then briefly to Colorado, building experience and references. The call to New Hope Community Church came in 2008. The small Arizona congregation needed renewal after their elderly pastor retired. Thomas presented himself as a perfect candidate, young, energetic, with fresh ideas and a talented wife who came as part of the package. The search committee practically hired them on the spot, said Bill Fenton, a church elder. Thomas had this way of making you feel like he was exactly what you've been praying for. Rebecca immediately enhanced the church's music program. She started a children's choir, organized holiday concerts that drew people from neighboring towns, and gave affordable piano lessons to local children whose parents couldn't manage private rates. Meanwhile, Thomas transformed Sunday attendance. Within 2 years, the church had added a second service. His preaching style connected with both elderly members and young families, biblically grounded but accessible, challenging but comforting. He knew everyone's name, remembered Dana Williams, a church secretary, asked about your kids, your job, your health. People felt seen by him. As New Hope grew, so did Thomas's regional reputation. He was invited to speak at conferences, joined the Ministerial Alliance Board, and became the unofficial spokesman for local churches on community matters. People started joining New Hope specifically to hear him preach. But looking back, some congregants now see what they missed. Thomas's need for admiration. How he'd sometimes cut Rebecca off mid-sentence during planning meetings. The way church decisions increasingly required his approval, even in areas where others had expertise. "I once suggested a different arrangement for a Christmas carol," said former choir member Karen Davis. Thomas shut it down immediately, even though music wasn't his background. "Rebecca just gave me this look, not angry, just resigned. Like this happened all the time." His financial oversight increased too. Initial budgeting committees gave way to Thomas having final say on all expenditures. When Rebecca was named co-director of the new building fund in 2015, Thomas promptly created bylaws requiring dual signatures, his and the treasurer's, on all withdrawals. "We thought it was responsible stewardship," the church treasurer later admitted. Turns out it was about control. Perhaps most telling was how Thomas spoke about Rebecca from the pulpit, initially praising her contributions, gradually mentioning her less. In his last year of sermons, recordings show he rarely acknowledged her presence at all, despite her continued service every Sunday at the piano. The foundation for what would eventually happen was being laid, not in dramatic moments, but in small, almost imperceptible shifts of power and perception that few recognized until it was too late. New Hope Community Church wasn't always central to Copper Valley's identity. Before the Wrights arrived, it was a modest white-painted building on Saguaro Avenue with an aging congregation of about 60 members. Most locals drove past it without a second glance on their way to larger churches in neighboring towns. That changed remarkably quickly under Thomas's leadership. Within 5 years, Sunday attendance exceeded 300 people, significant in a town of just over 12,000. The original building underwent renovations, new windows, expanded parking, and a digital sign displaying weekly sermon topics and community events. By 2013, New Hope had become a landmark that residents used when giving directions. Turn left at New Hope Church became common local navigation advice. This physical transformation mirrored New Hope's evolving role in community life. What began as Sunday services expanded to weekday programs addressing real needs in Copper Valley. When the town's only youth center closed due to county budget cuts in 2012, Thomas announced New Hope would fill the gap. "Our faith means nothing if it doesn't serve our neighbors," he declared in a sermon that many townspeople still quote. "This church will stand in the breach." The following Monday, Rebecca started an after-school music program that gave teenagers somewhere safe to go. Thomas opened the church fellowship hall for homework help sessions. These initial efforts were modest, but immediately impactful. Local school principal Dorothy Vaughn noted the difference. Juvenile incidents dropped almost 40% once those church programs started. Kids had somewhere to go, something constructive to do. These early successes built public trust that proved crucial when Thomas proposed more ambitious charitable initiatives in 2014. During a town hall meeting at the high school gymnasium, he unveiled plans for a purpose-built youth center on vacant land behind the church, complete with sports facilities, computer lab, and music rooms where Rebecca could expand her programs. "He showed us blueprints and everything," remembered town council member Jeff Dawson. Said New Hope was committing the first $50,000 from their reserves, but would need community support for the rest of the estimated $500,000 budget. The response was overwhelming. Local businesses pledged donations. Church members increased their giving. The Copper Valley Sun ran weekly progress reports on the building fund thermometer, rising steadily outside the church. Alongside the Youth Center initiative, Thomas and Rebecca established the New Hope Futures scholarship program for local students. The concept was simple but powerful. Full community college tuition for Copper Valley graduates who couldn't otherwise afford higher education. "We believed education was the best investment we could make," Rebecca told a local paper in a rare interview. "These students will become tomorrow's community leaders." The first year, New Hope awarded 3 scholarships. By year 3, 12 students received funds, an achievement celebrated at an annual banquet that became one of Copper Valley's premier social events. Business owners bought entire tables. Local politicians made appearances. The scholarship program positioned New Hope as far more than a religious institution. It became a catalyst for community advancement. Fundraising success seemed to validate Thomas's approach. Donation boxes filled weekly. The building fund grew faster than projected. Local attorneys even reported an increase in wills naming New Hope as a beneficiary. People trusted Thomas completely, said Evelyn Hernandez, who owned the bakery across from the church. They'd hand him checks after Sunday service, sometimes without even taking receipts. That's how much faith they had in his management. This community confidence allowed Thomas to centralize financial oversight with minimal resistance. When he proposed creating a separate nonprofit foundation for the charitable funds with himself as president, the church board unanimously approved. Few questioned when he recommended limiting financial reporting to quarterly summaries rather than detailed statements. By 2017, New Hope managed over $400,000 in dedicated charitable funds, a remarkable sum for a small-town church. The youth center was projected to break ground any month now, though the timeline had already shifted several times. The scholarship program continued to grow, with Thomas announcing at each award ceremony that they were building an endowment to secure its future. No one imagined that behind these impressive charitable facades, serious problems were developing. Rebecca Wright never intended to investigate her husband. Her discovery began innocently in January 2019, when a parent of scholarship recipient approached her after Sunday service with confused expression. "Mrs. Wright, did the church change the payment schedule? Alicia's tuition check was due last week, but the college says they haven't received anything." This wasn't the first time Rebecca had fielded questions about delayed scholarship payments. Usually, Thomas explained them away as administrative timing issues. But this particular student might lose her place in the program, and Rebecca promised to look into it immediately. The church office was empty that Sunday afternoon. Rebecca sat at the administrative computer, intending only to check the payment status. But when she opened the scholarship fund records, something caught her attention. The account balance was significantly lower than it should have been based on the fundraising totals announced at church. "At first, I thought I was misremembering the numbers," Rebecca later told investigators. "I figured there must be a simple explanation." She printed the most recent statements and took them home, comparing them against the church bulletins from the past year. The discrepancy wasn't small. Nearly $30,000 was missing from the scholarship account alone. When Thomas returned from a meeting that evening, she casually mentioned the delayed tuition payment. He assured her he'd handle it tomorrow. "Just a processing delay with the bank," he said, quickly changing the subject. The next day, Rebecca noticed a payment had indeed been made, but from the church's general operating fund, not the scholarship account. This unusual transfer prompted her to look deeper. Over the following weeks, Rebecca created a careful system to track the financial inconsistencies without alerting Thomas. She volunteered to organize a church archive for historical purposes, giving her access to years of financial records. During weekday afternoons when the church was empty, she methodically compared public announcements with actual bank statements. The Youth Center Fund showed the most alarming pattern. Despite raising over $300,000, the dedicated account held less than $120,000. Transfers had been made to various accounts, some of which Rebecca couldn't access. Construction had been delayed 4 times, with Thomas citing permitting issues and contractor scheduling problems. "I started taking photos of documents with my phone," Rebecca confided to her sister in text, "messages recovered later. I'm afraid to leave a trail on the computer." By March, Rebecca had documented nearly $200,000 in unexplained transfers from charitable funds. She created a hidden folder of evidence in a cloud storage account, organizing everything by date and fund. Her methodical approach reflected her piano training, patient, precise, and thorough. What she couldn't document was where the money had gone. Some transfers led to accounts she couldn't access. Others disappeared entirely from records. The pattern suggested someone with intimate knowledge of the church's financial systems. Someone like her husband. Rebecca's personal journal, recovered after her death, revealed her growing internal conflict. "I keep hoping there's an explanation I'm missing," she wrote in April. Maybe he's consolidated funds for better interest rates. Maybe there's a separate account for actual construction I don't know about. But her entries grew increasingly troubled as evidence mounted. I checked with the city today. No building permits have been filed for the youth center property. Not now, not ever. The most painful entries describe her struggle with what to do next. How do I ask my husband of 18 years if he's stealing from our church? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm right? Either way, nothing will ever be the same. For weeks, Rebecca told no one about her discoveries. She continued playing piano each Sunday, smiling beside Thomas in the receiving line after services. But church members later recalled she seemed increasingly withdrawn. She stopped coming to women's ministry events, noted longtime church member Judy Winters. When I asked if everything was okay, she just said she had a lot on her mind. By early July, Rebecca had compiled undeniable evidence of financial misconduct. After much prayer and deliberation, she decided she had to confront Thomas directly. "I can't ignore this anymore," read her final journal entry. "The truth matters more than comfort. The people who trusted us deserve better. If you've ever had to confront someone you love about a difficult truth, share your experience in the comments. Your insight might help others facing similar situations." July 15th began like any other Sunday at New Hope. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as families arrived for the 9:30 service. Ushers handed out bulletins announcing upcoming events, including another delay to the youth center groundbreaking, now scheduled for early fall. Rebecca arrived earlier than usual, her folder of financial documents tucked inside her music bag. Those who saw her noted she seemed composed but unusually quiet as she arranged her sheet music at the piano. She played beautifully that morning, remembered choir director Michael Foster. But something was different. She chose more contemplative pieces for the prelude, not her typical uplifting selections. Thomas delivered a sermon about integrity from the book of Proverbs. Several congregants later commented on the irony. He spoke about how the truth will set you free, said longtime member Diane Cooper. Rebecca kept her eyes on her hands the entire time. After the final benediction, Rebecca remained at the piano while Thomas greeted congregants in the lobby. She played softly, almost absently, as the sanctuary emptied. Church video surveillance showed her sitting there for nearly 20 minutes after everyone had gone. At 11:47 a.m., cameras captured Rebecca walking purposely down the hallway toward Thomas's office, her music bag replaced with a manila folder. Thomas had just finished speaking with the last church members and was alone. No cameras recorded what happened inside the office, but the church secretary, returning early from lunch, overheard portions of their conversation to the partially open door. Rebecca's voice was calm at first. Meredith Tanner later testified. "I heard her say, 'I need to understand what's happening with the accounts.' Then papers rustling." According to Tanner, Thomas initially sounded confused, then defensive. He said something like, "Why are you digging through financial records? That's not your responsibility." The conversation quickly escalated. Rebecca's voice remained steady but grew more insistent as she apparently presented her evidence. "I know about the transfers, Thomas. I know there's no permit for the youth center. I know the scholarship account is nearly empty." Thomas's response became louder, more agitated. "You're misinterpreting everything. These are complex financial matters you don't understand." Tanner heard Rebecca respond. "Then explain them to me. Explain why nearly $200,000 is missing." At this point, Thomas reportedly demanded to know who else Rebecca had told. When she admitted she'd documented everything but hadn't shared her findings yet, his tone changed. "He got very quiet," Tanner recalled. "That scared me more than the yelling. He said, 'You need to give me those files and forget about this. You're making dangerous accusations.'" Rebecca refused. "These aren't accusations, they're facts. If there's an explanation, tell me now. Otherwise, I'm taking this to the board tomorrow." The secretary heard movement, a chair scraping footsteps, and quickly retreated to the front desk. Moments later, Rebecca emerged from the office, her face pale but resolved. The folder was still clutched tightly in her hand. "She saw me and stopped," Tanner said. "For a second I thought she might say something. Instead, she just gave me this look, not frightened exactly, but determined, like someone who'd finally made a difficult decision. Thomas appeared in the doorway behind her, his expression unreadable. "Rebecca," he called, his voice now controlled. "We're not finished discussing this." Without turning around, Rebecca replied, "Yes, we are. I'll see you at home." Church cameras showed Rebecca walking steadily to her car at 12:23 p.m. Thomas remained in his office with the door closed for another 40 minutes before leaving through the side entrance. 3 people called Rebecca's cell phone that afternoon: her sister, a piano student's mother, and the choir director. None of their calls were answered. At 5:47 p.m., Thomas Wright called 911 from their home, his voice frantic. "My wife? I think she fell. Please hurry. She's not breathing." By the time paramedics arrived 6 minutes later, Rebecca Wright had been dead for hours. The 5 hours and 24 minutes between Rebecca's departure from the church and Thomas's 911 call represent the critical window when everything changed. No witnesses saw Rebecca after she drove away from New Hope. Her cell phone location data placed her arriving at the Wright home at approximately 12:40 p.m. Thomas initially told investigators he remained at church until mid-afternoon, working on next week's sermon. "Sunday afternoons are my preparation time," he explained in his first police interview. "I usually stay until 4 or 5. However, church security footage showed his car leaving the parking lot at 1:03 p.m. When confronted with this discrepancy, Thomas claimed he'd forgotten stopping home briefly to pick up reference materials before going to a coffee shop to work. "Rebecca was fine when I saw her," he stated. "She was upset about some church business, but we agreed to discuss it later. I left after about 20 minutes. No witnesses at the coffee shop remembered seeing Thomas that afternoon, and his laptop showed no activity during the time frame he claimed to be working there." According to Thomas's account, he returned home around 5:30 p.m. and found Rebecca unconscious at the bottom of the stairs. "I called out when I came in, but she didn't answer. Then I saw her lying there. I thought she must have tripped and fallen." The 911 call painted a picture of panic and confusion. "Dispatcher, 911, what's your emergency?" "Thomas, my wife? I think she fell. Please hurry. She's not breathing." "Dispatcher, is she conscious?" "Thomas, no. She's on the floor. There's blood. I think she fell down the stairs." "Dispatcher, are you with her now?" "Thomas, yes, I just got home and found her like this." "Dispatcher, is she breathing at all?" "Thomas, I don't think so. Please hurry." First responders arrived to find Thomas performing what appeared to be CPR, though the paramedic supervisor later noted his technique was ineffective at best. Rebecca was pronounced dead at the scene. Initial observations supported the possibility of an accidental fall. The Wright home featured a steep staircase with hardwood steps, and Rebecca's body was positioned near the bottom. A significant head wound was immediately apparent. Detective Maria Jimenez, first officer at the scene, described Thomas as appropriately distraught. He provided a consistent account of finding his wife after returning home, emphasizing their earlier disagreement had been minor. He kept saying it was just a church matter, nothing serious, Jimenez noted in her report. Something felt rehearsed about his grief, but that's not uncommon in shock situations. The investigation shifted dramatically during the medical examiner's preliminary assessment. Dr. Anthony Nguyen identified several concerning elements inconsistent with a staircase fall. The primary injury was a depressed skull fracture with a distinct pattern suggesting impact from a solid, curved object, Dr. Nguyen's report stated. Additionally, the body showed signs of lividity inconsistent with its discovered position, indicating movement after death. Most significantly, the medical examiner placed Rebecca's time of death between 1:30 and 2:30 p.m., hours before the 911 call. When crime scene technicians processed a home, they discovered blood evidence had been partially cleaned from the kitchen floor. Luminol revealed a substantial blood pattern extending from near the kitchen island to the hallway, nowhere near the staircase. A thorough search located a heavy brass candlestick holder in the outdoor trash bin, wrapped in blood-stained kitchen towels. The curved base matched the pattern of Rebecca's head wound. Confronted with these findings, Thomas maintained his innocence but changed his story. He now claimed he'd come home earlier and argued with Rebecca about her financial snooping, but left again after she became upset. He insisted she must have fallen in the kitchen while he was gone, then tried to reach the stairs for help. Maybe she was confused from the injury, he suggested. I found her by the stairs when I got home. This revised account contradicted physical evidence, showing Rebecca died quickly from the head wound and was moved after death. When investigators pointed this out, Thomas requested a lawyer and stopped answering questions. Cell tower data placed Thomas's phone at the house during the estimated time of death. His car was captured on a neighbor's security camera, arriving at 1:10 p.m. and leaving again at 3:05 p.m., directly contradicting both versions of his story. The folder of financial documents Rebecca had carried from the church was never found. What do you think happened in those missing hours? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Detective Elaine Morales took lead on the Wright case, bringing 16 years of homicide experience to an investigation that would uncover layers of deception beyond the initial crime. Her methodical approach began with securing all potential evidence from the Wright home, while forensic teams documented the scene. In domestic homicides, the truth is often in the details, Morales explained in her case notes. Contradictions tell us more than consistencies. The kitchen became the primary focus after luminol revealed extensive blood spatter that had been hastily cleaned. Analysis showed a pattern consistent with a single forceful blow delivered while Rebecca was standing near the island counter. Blood droplets on lower cabinets indicated she had fallen immediately, with minimal movement after impact. The scene tells us this wasn't a prolonged attack. Forensic technician David Ortiz testified later. One powerful strike, delivered with significant force from slightly above and behind the victim. The candlestick recovered from the outdoor trash provided crucial evidence. Despite Thomas's cleaning attempts, blood residue remained in the decorative grooves of its brass base. DNA analysis confirmed it was Rebecca's. More damning were microscopic brass particles embedded in the wound itself, creating what prosecutors would later call an unmistakable signature, linking weapon to injury. Fingerprint analysis revealed Thomas had handled the candlestick recently. His prints were found beneath the blood residue, suggesting he had gripped it before the attack. The kitchen towels wrapped around it contained both Rebecca's blood and Thomas's DNA from sweat. He made multiple mistakes in his cleanup, Morales noted. The kind of mistakes people make when acting in panic rather than with planning. While the physical evidence mounted, detectives pursued a parallel investigation into motive. Rebecca's hidden folder of financial documents was never recovered, but her cloud storage account provided investigators with copies of everything she had discovered. Forensic accountants from the State Bureau spent weeks reconstructing the financial trail. What they uncovered shocked even veteran investigators. Systematic embezzlement dating back nearly 4 years, totaling approximately $287,000 from church charitable funds. The pattern was sophisticated but recognizable, explained financial crime specialist Robert Jimenez. Small transfers to legitimate-sounding accounts that were actually under Thomas's control, followed by cash withdrawals that became increasingly frequent and larger over time. The Youth Center Fund had been particularly exploited. While publicly announcing fundraising milestones, Thomas had been steadily draining the account. Building permits he claimed were in process had never been filed. Architectural plans shown to donors existed only as presentation materials. No construction documents had ever been commissioned. Scholarship funds showed similar manipulation. While some students received their promised tuition, others were strung along with excuses about processing delays or paperwork issues. When payments became unavoidable, Thomas would transfer money from other church accounts to cover the most pressing cases. He was running a shell game, Jimenez testified, moving money between accounts to create the illusion of proper management while steadily extracting funds for personal use. But where had the money gone? This question led investigators to Thomas's personal finances, where they discovered extensive gambling activity. Credit card statements showed frequent visits to Desert Diamond Casino, 40 miles from Copper Valley. Casino records confirmed Thomas as a regular at high-stakes poker tables, sometimes losing thousands in single sessions. His pattern matched classic problem gambling behavior. Noted addiction specialist Dr. Lisa Hernandez, who reviewed the evidence. Initial small wins followed by escalating losses, and increasingly desperate attempts to recover through bigger bets. Text messages recovered from Thomas's phone revealed his growing financial desperation. In the months before Rebecca's death, he had contacted multiple payday loan services and made inquiries about second mortgages on their home, all without his wife's knowledge. Perhaps most surprising was the discovery of Thomas's hidden relationship with Natalie Weber, a real estate agent who had joined New Hope 2 years earlier. Weber initially denied any improper connection when interviewed, claiming they had only discussed church business. However, hotel receipts and credit card records told a different story. Thomas had spent over $22,000 on weekend getaways, jewelry, and expensive dinners with Weber over 18 months. Photos recovered from his cloud storage show them together in hotel rooms and restaurants in Phoenix, Las Vegas, and San Diego, always on weekends when Thomas had told Rebecca he was attending pastoral conferences. When confronted with this evidence, Weber admitted to the affair, but insisted she knew nothing about the embezzlement or Rebecca's death. He told me his marriage was essentially over, Weber stated in her deposition. He said they stayed together for the church's sake, but that Rebecca understood they had grown apart. I believed him. Weber provided investigators with text messages showing Thomas had contacted her the day of Rebecca's death, at 2:47 p.m., during the period when he claimed to be at a coffee shop. His message read, "Everything's falling apart. Rebecca found the financial records. She's threatening to go to the board. I don't know what to do." Weber's response, "What financial records? What are you talking about?" went unanswered until 7:30 that evening, when Thomas texted, "There's been a terrible accident. Rebecca fell down the stairs. She's gone. Please don't contact me for a while. Police will be investigating." This timeline directly contradicted Thomas's statements about discovering Rebecca at 5:30 p.m. and immediately calling 911. It suggested he had known of her death hours earlier and had been contemplating his response. Digital forensics revealed additional damning evidence. Thomas had searched online for accidental fall statistics, head trauma survival rates, and cleaning blood from wood floors between 3:15 and 4:30 p.m., hours before his 911 call. Location data from his phone placed him at home during the estimated time of death, then briefly at a hardware store, where security footage showed him purchasing cleaning supplies, before returning home again. The evidence creates a clear narrative, Detective Morales concluded in her final report. Thomas Wright killed his wife in a moment of rage when she confronted him about his financial crimes, then spent hours attempting to stage an accidental fall before finally calling authorities. When presented with the accumulated evidence, Thomas's attorney attempted to negotiate a plea deal. Prosecutors, citing the premeditated nature of the cover-up, if not the killing itself, refused to reduce the charges from first-degree murder. As the case moved toward trial, the community that had once revered Thomas right now struggled to reconcile the pastor they thought they knew with the man revealed by the investigation. News of Rebecca's murder and Thomas's arrest spread through Copper Valley like a shockwave. The community that had gathered every Sunday to hear Thomas preach about truth and integrity now struggled to process his betrayal. Yellow police tape around the Wright home became a symbol of collective trauma that transcended religious boundaries. "It wasn't just church members who felt deceived," said Mayor Gloria Ramirez. Thomas had integrated himself into every aspect of community life. He'd counseled our families, blessed our businesses, spoken at our schools. Finding out he was capable of this, it shattered something fundamental in our town. The Sunday following Thomas's arrest, nearly 500 people crowded into New Hope Sanctuary, almost double its usual attendance. Associate Pastor Kevin Daniels, visibly shaken, delivered a raw, emotional service focused on grief and healing rather than the scheduled sermon topic. "We gather today as broken people," Daniels began. "We've lost Rebecca, whose music brought beauty to our worship. We've lost trust in someone we respected. We've lost certainty about things we thought we understood." Many congregants wept openly. Others sat in stunned silence. The piano remained conspicuously empty, Rebecca's sheet music still arranged from her final service. Church leaders placed a single white rose on the bench, a gesture that would continue for months afterward. The congregation fractured in the weeks that followed. Some longtime members couldn't bear to enter the building where they'd been so thoroughly deceived. Others felt compelled to stay and rebuild. Attendance dropped by nearly 60% by the end of the first month. People processed their grief differently, explained Church elder Diane Hoffman. Some needed distance, others needed community. There was no right way to handle something none of us had ever imagined facing. Financial revelations created additional turmoil. As investigators untangled Thomas's embezzlement, scholarship recipients learned their future funding was in jeopardy. Youth center donors discovered their contributions had vanished. The church itself faced potential bankruptcy from misappropriated operational funds. Local attorney Michael Torres volunteered to help the church navigate these challenges. The financial damage was extensive but not insurmountable, Torres explained. The greater challenge was rebuilding trust in the institution itself. The church board implemented complete financial transparency in response. They published detailed statements online, established an independent oversight committee, and invited a respected accounting firm to restructure their financial systems. Meanwhile, the legal case against Thomas Wright proceeded methodically. His initial court appearance drew national media attention, with cameras capturing his transformation from charismatic pastor to defendant in an orange jumpsuit. He pleaded not guilty despite the overwhelming evidence. That first hearing was surreal, recalled courthouse reporter Jennifer Oakes. Half the people in that courtroom had listened to him preach about honesty and accountability. Now, they were watching him deny killing his wife after stealing from their community. Thomas's defense strategy shifted multiple times as pre-trial hearings revealed the strength of the prosecution's case. His attorneys initially suggested Rebecca's death was accidental, then pivoted to arguing Thomas had acted in self-defense during an argument. When forensic evidence contradicted both scenarios, they attempted to negotiate a plea deal for second-degree murder. Prosecutors refused to reduce charges, citing the calculated nature of Thomas's actions both before and after Rebecca's death. District Attorney Carlos Mendez was unequivocal. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a man who chose to kill rather than face the consequences of his actions, then methodically attempted to cover it up. The trial began 11 months after Rebecca's death. It lasted just 7 days. The prosecution presented a meticulous timeline supported by physical evidence, financial records, and digital forensics. Natalie Weber's testimony about Thomas's incriminating text messages proved particularly damaging. Thomas did not testify in his own defense. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours before turning a guilty verdict on all counts: first-degree murder, embezzlement, fraud, and evidence tampering. At sentencing, Judge Patricia Holden addressed Thomas directly. "You abused the trust of an entire community. You stole not just their money, but their faith in institutions meant to serve the greater good. Most unforgivably, you took the life of a woman who had dedicated herself to that same community, and who had the courage to stand for truth when she discovered your deception." Thomas received life imprisonment without possibility of parole. For New Hope Church, recovery came slowly but steadily. The congregation established a Rebecca Wright Memorial Music Program, providing free lessons to children throughout Copper Valley. They partnered with a neighboring church to create a scaled-down youth center that opened 2 years after Rebecca's death. Most significantly, they established the Transparency Project, an initiative helping religious organizations implement financial safeguards against fraud. The program has since been adopted by churches across Arizona. "Rebecca's legacy isn't the tragedy of her death," said Kevin Daniels, who eventually became New Hope's permanent pastor. "It's the commitment to truth she demonstrated in her final days. She could have looked away from what she discovered. She could have protected her marriage and reputation. Instead, she chose integrity, even knowing the personal cost." On the anniversary of Rebecca's death, Copper Valley residents gather for a memorial concert featuring local musicians and students from the program bearing her name. The event has become a symbol of community resilience, a testament to rebuilding after betrayal. The story of Thomas and Rebecca Wright forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about trust and deception. We want to believe we can recognize dishonesty, especially in those closest to us. Yet Thomas maintained a facade for years while systematically betraying everyone who trusted him. his congregation, his community, and most tragically, his wife. What makes this case particularly haunting isn't just the murder itself, but how it illuminates the vulnerability of our collective faith in institutions and leaders. Thomas exploited the natural human tendency to trust those who speak with authority and conviction. He understood that once people believe in someone, they'll rationalize inconsistencies rather than question their fundamental judgment. Rebecca's journey shows the courage required to face uncomfortable truths. Despite knowing what confronting Thomas might cost her personally and professionally, she chose integrity over comfort. She recognized that real loyalty isn't about maintaining appearances. It's about honoring deeper principles, even when doing so disrupts everything familiar. Rebecca wasn't just killed for what she discovered, Detective Morales reflected in a later interview. She was killed for who she was, someone who couldn't live with deception once she recognized it. Today, Rebecca's piano sits in the Copper Valley Community Center, where students from her memorial program practice daily. Her sheet music has been preserved in a glass case alongside photos of her teaching local children. These tangible reminders speak to how a life dedicated to truth and service creates ripples that continue long after tragedy. The scholarship recipients who benefited from her advocacy before the fund's collapse have established their own tradition. Each year, they volunteer teaching music to younger students, extending Rebecca's legacy of education and community service. Perhaps the most meaningful tribute comes from the financial transparency practices now implemented in organizations throughout Arizona. Rebecca's final act of courage, confronting wrongdoing despite personal risk, has created structural changes that will protect countless others from similar exploitation. In examining cases like this, we're reminded that true crime isn't just about understanding the darkness in human behavior. It's about recognizing the light that remains possible even in the aftermath of betrayal. If this case affected you, please like this video and subscribe to True Crime Stories. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. What case should we cover next? Let us know in the comments.